All right, good evening, everyone. I would like to call to order the December 3rd business meeting of the Croton-Harmon Board of Education. And we will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. If we could all rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right. And now we will move to the approval of the agenda. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose? Abstain? Motion carries. All right. And now we will move into our first point tonight is our Board of Education goal relating to inherent bias and cultural responsiveness. And I'm actually going to turn this over to Iris Bugliosi, who is the chair of our Board Development Committee, and she will lead us in our discussion this evening.
Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening, everyone. Okay, so tonight's goal discussion will focus on the board's inherent bias cultural responsiveness goal. So I'm going to ask if I can share my screen right now, Tracy. Oh. Okay, can you see my screen, everyone? Okay, all right. All right, so just so we can get started, as you recall, we said we're going to have like a 30-minute goal learning discussion prior to the beginning of our business meeting. So I'm just going to go through just a few slides to just sort of set the stage and so that the community can follow along, you know, sort of get our minds set and framed in what we're going to be embarking on this evening. So we may be discussing terms like equal, equity, equality, diversity, or inclusion. But I think it's important that we first start off with taking a look at the goal. I'm new at this. There we go, I didn't hit play. Okay, so, sorry, go back. So our goal reads as follows. The board will educate itself about inherent bias and cultural responsiveness in an effort to improve its decision-making and awareness as part of a district's, I gotta move this over, district-wide focus on these topics during the 2021 school year. The board will participate in trainings similar to that planned for district staff and explore the topic through a variety of means, which may include some of the following: retreats, meetings like the one we're having tonight, town halls, community conversations, and by attending workshops. And if you recall, we adopted this goal in February, right before the pandemic began. Before we begin, Board Development would like to share a few visuals with you as a framework to hopefully help everyone follow along as we use terms this evening. The Board and Administration may actually recognize these slides from the Ossining Stories session that we all watched. So let's look at some examples of equality, equity, and beyond. In this first image, it is assumed that everyone has what they need to meaningfully enjoy the view when given access to the same thing. They're being treated equally. This next image recognizes that if the object is for everyone to be able to enjoy the view, then you will need to tailor their experience to ensure they have the access they want to see the view. they are being treated equitably. But there is another possibility. In this final image, all three can see the view in their own unique way because the cause of the inequity was addressed. The systemic barrier has been removed. Now let's look at some images for diversity and inclusion. This image captures how there are many different shapes and sizes that puzzle pieces come in. It illustrates a type of diversity. But this final image captures what can happen when those different pieces come together. You can complete the puzzle. Inclusion celebrates the uniqueness of each piece. New York State Department of Education has adopted the culturally responsive sustaining education framework, which was designed to support education stakeholders in developing and implementing policies that educate all students effectively and equitably, as well as provides appropriate supports and services to promote positive student outcomes. What you see on the screen here are the 4 pillars or principles that New York State has adopted. So now tonight, during our discussion in support of our goal, the Board of Education and Administration, we're going to be on a reflective path. And in order to do that most effectively, board development thought it would be helpful to ask Natalie Zwerger from the New York Metro Center to facilitate our discussion. And so now I will turn it over to Natalie.
Thank you so much, Iris. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep.
Perfect. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My name is Natalie McCabe-Zwerger, and I am the director of the Center for Strategic Solutions down at the NYU Metro Center. We are an equity and racial justice center that works with schools, districts, and organizations around the country, and now has the privilege of working with Croton Harmon Schools. Had the opportunity to meet with a number of community members, and we just started our equity stakeholder team this week. So it's been a busy week for this type of work here. But I thought just very briefly, I would give you some context, and I know y'all have had the opportunity to hear from Ossining Union Free School District, which is one of the districts that has been working with us for a number of years around a very particular model that we call a system-wide equity intervention. Our center, were co-authors of the framework for the New York State Department of Education's framework for culturally responsive and sustaining education. It's a 74-page document centered around those 4 principles that Iris put up there. And really, it's made for us to take a look at our district as a system and to ask questions about how all of the moving parts, the individual people, the collectives, the offices, the teams, the policies and practices are either operating in furtherance of promoting diversity, equity, and inclusion, or are operating contrary to those goals. And really the premise is we won't see culturally responsive practices in classrooms if they're not embodied by leadership, if they're not embedded into the decision-making and protocols and policies that the board puts forth, and really that the community itself is supportive essentially of an infrastructure that is fostering these ideas of equity and inclusion. And so tonight, it seems like this is a great opportunity in a space to just reflect on the number of ways that you all have been both engaging with the community, but taking a look at some of the research and then the practice-based examples like in Ossining of how this work can roll out across a system. So the work we're doing in Croton Harmon is the same setup that we used in Ossining, beginning with leadership, making sure that there's a strong foundation for both the administrative council and the board. And then making sure that the stakeholder team is a space to bring together diverse voices from our community so that students are seated at the table with our superintendent, with board members, with parents and guardians, teachers and staff, to be doing this type of reflection together, asking questions about where we're doing a great job of being responsive and inclusive and where we need to grow. And that stakeholder team will set up a series of recommendations and then present them back to you, same process they used in Ossining. The board might endorse those recommendations. We'll see what happens. Boards many times do hear from the community as to why they're putting forth these suggestions. But essentially, you see there's a grassroots component to it so that the ones who are most impacted by the system have a voice in how to change it and to make it better. And so what we've seen happen in Ossining over the past 5 years is from the district level team, they have branched off into building level teams to localize this work. A conversation about responsive practices at the elementary level has to look very different than it looks at the secondary level. They've made shifts in hiring, in the way that they look at their disaggregated data and offer professional development. And really now the way that culturally responsive practices are just being seamlessly integrated as a part of their curriculum across all grade levels and all content areas. And so that's the hopeful trajectory here in Croton Harmon. And, you know, over the past number of months, although our community forum was October 28th, it feels like a lifetime ago, you all had an opportunity to hear directly from the community. And I facilitated and just asked these very broad questions about issues of equity and inequity, recommendations for the district. And we heard from children, we heard from families, we heard from staff. You also had those opportunities through NYSBA to hear from Ossining and then a couple of other research-based examples of what this work can look like. And then a couple of you were at our first equity stakeholder team meeting just this week, 2 days ago. And so I thought it would be great to just open it up and hear your reflections based on all of that exposure, looking at the board goal, what reflections you have, what's your thinking in terms of how we operationalize this goal here in Croton Harmon? Neil, I see you.
Since it's usually my role to start the ball in these kinds of things, I'll tell you just two very quick observations. And the first is that kind of education and sensitivity is key. And secondly, that I have a sense that there's a lot of underlying feelings of this, that there's a lot of underlying feelings of people who have been disrespected, misunderstood, etc., that others do not realize. And that goes to the kind of the broad area of implicit bias, where I can realize I don't really know how what I may be doing is affecting others and how they feel. And that's something that we need to become more sensitive to, both as a governance team and as members of the community. That's kind of to start our discussion.
Thank you, Neil. And I could hear you. There was a little bit of an echo. I don't know if Iris, you were getting the same echo, but I could hear it. You couldn't hear very well. Okay. Andrea, I see you.
I was just going to say, to follow up on what Neil said, one of the things I really noticed in the community conversation, and then I was in the stakeholders meeting the other day, was that a lot of it just comes down to personal conversations, that it's very important for people to have an opportunity to really hear from each other. And that entails like a safe space and support. And there were people in both meetings that I went to that were from every part of the community. And it was really important to hear from people who didn't have kids in the school, but were, really wanted to support the school, as well as, the parents and the teachers. It really, we have to make this a priority, but we also have to make the time for it. It's going to be a slow, steady process. And I think we all look forward to finding out, like, what are those concrete steps that you were talking about, how we can sort of actualize those.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, I call it a thoughtful urgency because you palpably feel urgent when you hear community members who are sharing experiences like the ones that Neil named. But we also know that we can't dive right into the deep end, right? There's a thoughtfulness to this process. And unfortunately, because I've been doing this work for a long time, I've seen districts that zoom right in and it becomes really challenging. I think if the goal is to build this infrastructure that's going to sustain over time, frankly, beyond the tenure of everyone on the Hollywood Squares here, then we have to have a more thoughtful approach. And it's not to say that we slow the pacing or that we ignore the urgency, but it is to say that we do take our time acknowledging that there are community members coming in with wildly different lived experiences, understandings, and really just frankly experience in Croton-Harmon that we'll have to really navigate together, as you said, leveraging storytelling, community building, those indigenous practices that we know can support us to get through what will assuredly be some discomfort as a part of the process, talking about race and identity. Did other folks have reflections on and even any of the three pieces, the three videos that you watched, the sessions that you engaged in? I know Austining was one of them, but there were two others on the pact. And then the third one, I don't have the name of it in front of me, but I know there were three. Iris, yeah, go ahead.
Hi, yes, no, I just want to also encourage the administration. It's really the hope of forward development is this is sort of the leadership team having an opportunity to discuss and reflect on some of the things we've listened to and learned. I know I've picked up quite a few interesting perspectives and pearls of, I call them pearls that will be great to cultivate and try and help to build our system so that every single student, that all means all. I think I heard that in one of the videos I've attended recently, that all of our students are in a space where they are being enriched at the level they need so that they become the best version of themselves. And there's no block to that. There's nothing in place that makes it impossible for them to dream big. One of the things that has really resonated with me has been the concept of, and I just want to pull this up from my notes, that kids believe what they see and what they hear. And we're in the position of making sure that what they see and what they hear reflects what will enrich them the most. If we fall short, if we only show them one perspective, or if we only give them access to one viewpoint, their growth will have to occur after they leave Croton-Harmon instead of while they're here. And I think it's a wonderful magic if we can be the beginners of that wonderful journey for their lives.
I think if I could share, hold on, do I have to do something? I think if I could share from my perspective, I know, Natalie, you often use the words using your sphere of influence. And within that sphere of influence, how do you dismantle and disrupt inequity, et cetera? That just always resonates in my mind. What I'd like to share is, I think from at least some students' perspectives, they're beginning to see the board goal, the fact that we had a community forum and then a stakeholder team meeting. I think from some students who have been involved with us, and as we take, we launch our journey, I think they're really beginning to see some action. And that was noted in my superintendent advisory committee meeting with my one group. And they're seeing, and I'm hoping they're also seeing the other connections to the No Place for Hate work that's going on in the schools. Natalie, then you came and met with our student group. I think they're hopefully seeing our purposeful attempts at, this work becoming a part of how we do business and how, what's our normal and our culture. So, from my perspective, I'm starting to see those actions, not just being in words, but in motion.
If I could, one of the things, and to piggyback on what Dr. O'Connell was saying, and where we're starting here, and what Natalie, you had said about making sure that we take a thoughtful approach. One of the things that struck me when I was listening to the Austining story was when they talked about the fact that, it is this is now, it's structural, right? You're approaching all things with equity in mind, and that equity is always on the agenda. It's always something that administration is thinking of, that the board is thinking of, and looking for ways to tie that into everything else. And I think that is something that will be so important for us, as you said, so that it carries on long past all of us, and becomes something that is just such a structural part of the district.
That is such an important point, Sarah. There are so many schools and districts that approach this work as an event. Today's the Race and Equity Day. We'll be talking about these issues, which does such a disservice to the mission that we say we have. When I think back to the image that Iris showed us, that fence, those barriers are not always so visible. They're invisible barriers to access, into opportunity, into information, into resources. And so if you're not going to take a systematic approach and you're just going to, host space for this dialogue every once in a while, then you're going to miss out on the opportunity to actually find some of those hard to see barriers that have been ingrained in our system for years, that unfortunately reflect trends that we see across this country in districts of all different sizes and demographics. And so really this is about curating spaces where every stakeholder, but particularly those in positional power like the board, have a set of protocols to activate that lens and then employ it in all decision making, which I think is important language in your board goal. Because you are the gatekeeper decision makers, and you do need to have that space where you've done the reflection on how who you are informs how you gatekeep, informs how you make those decisions, informs how you operate as a collective. And I can't emphasize enough that we're doing this work in a state where the State Department of Education has put forth this mandate upon our school districts to accept every 24 hours as another opportunity to be more responsive to the children we serve. And so that I hold that responsibility very seriously. And doing this work outside of New York, some of the states I work in, I don't have that same leverage. So we're, privileged to work in a state that has this commitment, but also that's a responsibility for us to live up to, and to curate the spaces that will build our own capacity. And then because I'm looking at, powerful leadership on the screen, to build your capacity to support others to navigate this work, because there will be challenges. It is uncomfortable. We're asking our community to engage in dialogue around a lot of topics that they're not used to engaging in classrooms, in the workplace. And so how do we navigate, pushing through that discomfort in furtherance of, keeping our eyes on the address that we put into the GPS? And by that, I mean the promises we've made to our young people. And I've had the privilege of meeting a number of the young people that you serve, and they are brilliant and so much more ready for this work than we are. Any other thoughts from folks? Yeah, Andrea, go ahead.
I was just, oh, sorry. I was just going to ask Iris, when she leads us through to talk about, so in some ways from the board development perspective, this is just the very, very beginning. This is like our little intro. And that one of the things that board development talked about is having a retreat on this topic to really be able to dive into it, a lot more in depth and with a lot more substance to our conversations. This is just, sort of our half hour, get to know everybody and the topic a little bit. And I just was going to bring that up. So that's one thing that the board is planning on is having a retreat in January, if we can, or early February. We'll figure out the scheduling.
Joshua, did you want to jump in?
Okay, I'll go first. So, one of the things that's really been coming up for me as these discussions progress is that my experience at one moment in time is not the same as my experience at another moment in time. The way I perceived myself in the world and the way I perceived the world around me when I was growing up living in Baltimore, in the suburbs of Baltimore, was very different when I looked back, when 10 years, 20 years later, I'd been living in New York already for 20 years, and then I went back and spent 2 months in Baltimore, and I realized that things that I took as a matter of course when I was living there were very different when viewed from the different perspective after having lived in New York and done a lot of work in my life and experienced a much broader group of acquaintances and colleagues and friends before coming back to that community in Baltimore that was, much more homogeneous than I had ever realized that it was. And I think while that was really extreme and really obvious to me, I think that as people move through their lives, they're always encountering these new situations, and that it forces and inherent in that they're going to review the past of their lives and review their past experiences with new eyes. And I think part of our task is to make it easy for people to view the world with new eyes, and to make it safe for them to view the world with new, more egalitarian eyes.
Yeah, Neil, I see you.
I agree with everything that Josh said. The one thing that I'd like to just put in the mix as we go forward, and I know this is something that we talk about a lot in a lot of the work that we do, is assessing how we've been doing. And this is obviously not the same as a pre-assessment and then a post-assessment after a unit of study. But I really, I think one of the things that Natalie said is, you don't want this to just be an event. You want it to be something that is going to be successful and is really going to bring about a cultural change. So I'd like to, and I don't know what it is because it's not a hard and fast quantitative measure, but I'd like something to be thought about perhaps during our retreat or thereafter, about, how do we know how we're doing, and how do we sense that among our staff, among our students, in terms both of what we see, how people are treating each other, and what people tell us as to how the atmosphere has changed, that we have really moved towards the goal. I will perhaps, rely on Natalie's expertise and those of others to say how, to give us kind of tools to do that. But I think that's something we should keep in mind as we go forward.
And I think you may have not even realized it, but in hearing the Ossining story, you experienced some of the measures of impact. So one of the presenters, Melissa Morris Banta, who is a board trustee, was on the original district-wide equity committee in Ossining as a parent 5 years ago. One of the original student equity leaders on the first district equity team committee, Tiana Pagan, now works with my team at the Metro Center and is a college student activist. 2 articles were just written about her in the past week about her activism. And so Joshua made me think about one of the parts of the definition of culturally responsive and sustaining education is empowering our students as agents of change. That's the measure. Right? We have the measure in the people who are now change makers in all of the ways that we are trying to, foster spaces to curate their brilliance so that they can become that and continue to become that. So those measures will be complex. No one ever likes this answer, but my answer is always, you have to ask the people who experience the most inequity in the system if they feel a palpable change. And if they report to you that something feels different, then that's your impact. It's hard to measure. You need quantitative data, you need qualitative data, you need feelings that are difficult. Inclusivity is notoriously hard to measure, but the measures will be complex of your impact and certainly palpable. John, I saw you wanted to speak too.
I don't know if you read about my signal. I didn't have anything to say, but I will share how impressed I am with your speaking of students and activism and their willingness to be part of this work of the members of the stakeholder team that have stepped forward. And what the board would not have a lens on, because I'm sending out invites and I'm leading that email chain, is the level of enthusiasm and correspondence that's happening offline. So if there's anything that's really encouraging about a beginning to this work, is the excitement about the people within the stakeholder team and the amount of gratitude they're showing, the desire to have materials, the desire to ask questions and be inquisitive about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. I think it's just a positive sign that there's a certain readiness within that stakeholder team. And now I'll just be curious to see how that flourishes and moves beyond that team that's already off to such a great start.
Yeah, there was palpable energy, and I think we're approaching our time, so I know I probably have to hand it back over to Iris, but I'm just really looking forward to having more opportunities to engage with you all in the future and certainly with the equity stakeholder team. So thank you for tonight.
Can you hear me? Denise, I saw your hand go up quickly, and I know you haven't had an opportunity. And if there was something you wanted to say quick, we did start a little bit late, so we're just at 30 minutes.
It's probably something that should have been stated earlier, but one of my struggles is bringing inequity into the fold without bringing too much attention and shining too much of a light on the individual themselves. I have the privilege of working with someone who has some disabilities. I have situations in my own family life, and a lot of times when I say, how can I honor this? A lot of the time I hear, I don't no special attention, no extra privileges, treat me equally. So it's hard to get to the point of bringing the inequity into the fold and into the light without shining too much of a light on the individual. And that's where I struggle. Next meeting, we'll talk about that. Thank you.
So did everyone have a chance to say any closing thoughts or words before we move to our next step? Okay. So as Andrea alluded, thank you so much, Natalie, for helping us with this very, very small, brief opportunity to be reflective. Our next step will be hopefully to have a retreat where we can spend maybe 2 hours or so working on a deeper dive. but also we have on our calendar, the board development has placed each goal on a meeting. So you'll see this come up on our calendar again. And so one of the things we wanted to know from you, my notes have all gotten mixed up here. I think everyone has already, Andrea mentioned this as well as Natalie and John. There might be a desire to jump to action steps right away. And we really have to resist that urge because this goal is really designed by the board to give us the tools we need to become inclusive-minded and culturally responsive decision makers. So it's a tool, it's for the enhancement of our ability to be effective leaders. To that end, what board development would like to know is what would be helpful for you as we continue our learning to support this goal. So if everyone can send us an email, what topics, what kind of a presentation, what would be helpful? We've come up with the retreat for one avenue, but there are so many other ways and things that we can learn in order to have a good set point for getting involved and working through this year, next year, and beyond. So please email us.
You froze for a second, right?
Was I frozen?
You're good now.
Did you hear any of it? Okay.
Probably.
Okay, Iris, can you just repeat the end, because that's what we missed, the end of your statement.
Oh, I was asking.
Yeah.
She's not
Everyone.
Technology.
I think she was asking everybody to email her with ideas of takeaways and things that can help us in this endeavor.
Great. All right. Okay. Thank you again, Natalie, for joining us this evening. And that will conclude this learning session. But as Iris said, we have many more learning sessions on our various board goals, half an hour before each meeting for the foreseeable future. So we will definitely be going back to this. But thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Have
We
a great
appreciate
night.
it.
Thank you.
All right, and now we will move on to the president's report. So I will hop in here. So thank you to those of us that are watching our December meeting via live stream. I wanted to use my president's report tonight to highlight some things from our schools, but I also first wanted to make a note about an important correction to the advocacy action email that we sent last week. At our last meeting, we had passed a resolution regarding transportation aid during the pandemic, which asked New York State to protect public education funding for school districts by reimbursing transportation aid. In that email, we indicated that the impact to our district was approximately $70,000. That was actually the monthly calculation. The total impact to our district is roughly $280,000. So we want to continue to ask the community to support this important advocacy effort. And now I would like to highlight some stuff going on at our schools. So CET reports to us that last year, they actually participated in the Kids Heart Challenge. As a school community, we raised over $19,156. This was our highest donation year yet. Throughout Rockland, Ulster, Orange, Putnam, and Westchester County, 180 schools participated. CET placed number 3 out of all of those counties. And out of the 969 New York State schools, we were number 11. So we wanted to thank the kids at CET for all of their hard work and dedication and participating in the Kids Heart Challenge. Over at PBC, student council elections took place on Monday, November 30th. Candidates for office created speeches that were distributed digitally to all the students at PBC. So those, I believe those were actually tabulated and announced at PVC, but the administration and faculty are excited to be working with the student officers this year and working with them and learning more about student government. And over at the high school, we just opened the brand new library active learning space this week. And actually, I knew I was going to forget something. So I actually had the opportunity to do a facilities tour with Dr. O'Connell and Mr. Gibbons this week. So I was actually able to see the new active learning space in library, and it looks fantastic. So this is part of the continued work on creating active learning spaces in the high school, in addition to the new computer lab that was completed last spring. And it really does, it looks incredible. Also, some of our 11th grade English students, as well as members of the STAR and student activism clubs, took part in a virtual field trip as part of the Young Leaders series on November 9th. Students got to see Claudia Rankine speak about the racial divide in America and were able to interact both with Ms. Rankine and with other students from many states and cities. And lastly, I have some athletics updates. So the Athletic Study Committee was launched this week and had their first meeting on December 1st, looking at the athletics culture that we want to have here in Croton-Harmon. The start of winter sports has been moved back to January 4th for low and moderate risk sports of track and field, skiing, and boys swim. Basketball, wrestling, and cheer are not scheduled to start on January 4th. We're waiting for a decision from the governor about whether they will allow competition in these sports. We have been running boys and girls basketball intramurals and football intramurals weekly in cohort, and modified sports are scheduled to start on January 19th. And that is it for my president's report. And now we have, now should be the hearing of the public. We don't have any public with us in the building this evening, and I did not receive any letters from anyone. We do want to hear from you, so please feel free to email either myself or the board if you have something that you would like to bring up at a board meeting. And from then, I will turn it over to Dr. O'Connell for her superintendent's report.
Well, thank you, and good evening to the board and our viewing public. I will.
I think we lost you.
Third time's a charm. All right, how's that?
Okay.
Wonderful. So good evening to the board and our viewing public. Tonight, I will continue to address COVID-related issues. So last night, I did launch a K-12 alert, and a very important one. Again, I want to reiterate, we are not in a zone at this point. So let me back up and say, I continue to share through my messages about Governor Cuomo's Cluster Action Initiative. And in that initiative, he speaks of 3 zones: yellow, orange, and red. The governor's briefing on Monday spoke about a few things, mainly what he calls his winter plan to combat COVID. And within that briefing, he shared 5 strategies. First was about hospitalization and how the metric that he will be using to determine the yellow, orange, and red will have several pieces to it. Looking at hospitalization rate, death rate, positivity rate, availability of hospital beds, availability of ICU beds, and availability of healthcare staffing. And within those pieces, they'll develop, I believe, the metric for the yellow, orange, and red zones. Within that 5 strategies, hospitalization and the micro cluster zones was one. He then spoke about balanced testing, working towards having a gross amount of testing in a balanced distribution, such as healthcare workers, nursing homes, schools, essential workers, business professionals, and personal services. The third piece was a real focus on keeping schools open. He spent time saying how safe schools are, the low positivity rate of schools, and that a real focus to keep schools open. He wants a sustainable, ongoing testing program in schools for long-term operations. He then also talked about the weekly testing in an orange and a red zone and the percentages of testing in those. And when I say percentages of testing, that means of the students that are in person, whatever percentage the zone designates, it would be that percentage of the in-person students that would need to be tested, as well as faculty and staff, in order for a school to remain open for in-person instruction. We would have to meet that percentage goal. So he spoke about that. He used words like it's the state advice to keep K through 8 open whenever safe. He spent some time talking about special education and K through 8 in his briefing on Monday, but in general, keeping schools open with a comprehensive testing protocol. He then went on to talk about the fourth part of the strategies was the concern about where the great positivity rate is coming from our small gatherings and why the 10-person household limit is so important. And then the fifth piece was the vaccination program. So those were the 5 strategies he spoke about in terms of his winter plan. But now drilling down into schools, I've spoken about this in my writings to the public as well as in my superintendent comments about testing. We have found out that New York State Department of Health would be providing school districts with the free rapid Binax Now antigen card test by Abbott. The test is a nasal swab. It goes in about 1 inch in each nostril with the swab. It's not the nasopharyngeal one that goes far up, but the just 1 inch in. The Binax card system in my K-12 alert, I did give a link. So if families wanted to see the actual Binax card system and how it works, it is just as the word implies, a rapid test. The card opens, there's 2 holes in it. You put the reagent, several drops in the first hole, and after the nasal swab has finished both nostrils, then it goes into the second hole, mixes with the reagent, it closes, it seals. 15 minutes later, there's a result. 1 line for, I believe, negative, and then 2 lines appear if it was positive. So this particular test, again, is being supplied by New York State for this surveillance testing. In Croton-Harmon, if we get into a zone, we would be randomly selecting people for the testing process. We've also included in the alert, in the K-12 alert last night, a consent form, which people have been completing. As I said, who would be tested? It would be we would have to do a certain percentage of in-person students as well as faculty and staff. We would be operating under the Westchester County Department of Health, something called an LSL, a limited service laboratory agreement. That is what gives us the permission to do the testing at schools. We are in the process with our COVID coordinator team. That is John Griffiths is our district COVID coordinator. Each of the assistant principals are building level COVID coordinators. Our nurses and our athletic trainer are part of our COVID team. They have been working actively to get our plan in place should we become in a zone. We're doing this ahead of time so that we are prepared should we be given a zone designation. We also in the K-12 alert, and I wanted to take a moment to share, we also thought long and hard about what would be the most effective way to do our testing and when. And from the K-12 alert, we spoke about moving our remote day to a Monday. And the reason for that, and I want to make sure that everybody is clear, that when we have a positive case, the normal practice with the guidance and collaboration with the Westchester County Department of Health, we have to go back 2 days, 48 hours in our contact tracing process. What that means is when we find out we have a positive case, or the first day somebody becomes symptomatic and then tests positive, we go back 2 days. Any person that person who is positive comes in contact with becomes on the list to need to quarantine. So with our testing program, should we go into a zone, we thought it might be most prudent to do the testing on a Monday, so that should we have a positive case from our testing program, we would need to contact trace back 2 days. That would be Saturday and Sunday. The impact on the school system would be reduced in terms of the need to quarantine. So an example, if we do testing on another day and we have a positive, we'd have to go back 2 days. And it's very possible that that positive person would need, a lot of people would have been in contact with that positive person in a class, in the building, et cetera, that they might need to quarantine. So the reason for the switch is that we felt we would reduce the number of students or staff that would need to quarantine should we have a positive based on our testing program. So with all of that said, the change would not occur until we were in a zone. And the change would not occur until the public receives something from me to say, at this point, we're going to make a change in our schedule. So it's business as usual until we have any indication we're in a zone. And then I would communicate when we would make the changes to our schedule. So I think that's an important piece I wanted to, we said it in writing, but I wanted to reiterate in my comments tonight. Again, we are just preparing for the event should we move into a zone. And I wanted to give the public, our families, our staff, you know, at least a glimpse in, a lens into our thinking so that they can factor it into their planning as this could be a possibility. Now, I focus on the positives with our testing program, and that's why we might make some changes. What's also important to note is, again, one of the governor's concerns is coming off of Thanksgiving that we might have an increased positivity rate. So, of course, those would be positives not related to our testing program. It still might result in quarantining. And again, this is something we are monitoring very, very closely here in Croton. Some other pieces, consent is definitely a part of this, parental consent. Appointments would be necessary. We would use a scheduling tool for our testing program, et cetera. So those are just some of the key pieces I wanted to make sure I brought up tonight, that the governor is really looking at using several variables to make decisions on the metric for each zone, yellow, orange, or red. I'm holding off on talking about the specifics of each zone because he's already, he and the Department of Health have made some slight changes already to some of the pieces. But we will follow whatever the zone designation calls for, the percentage of testing, the time period of which testing can occur, et cetera. And should someone not want the testing in the school and they are part of the randomly selected group, they certainly can go to their own healthcare provider for a test as long as we get the results within the window of time that is required for reporting. So that, I believe, is my COVID report. I was extremely happy to hear so many positive statements about schools that the governor made. I can always take a moment to say how proud I am of our students, our faculty and staff, on how serious they are taking this when they are in school. And, really very proud of the safety measures that they're following, that we've put in place, et cetera. And we can never let our guard down. We have to keep on keeping on. As we did on the first day, we must continue to do so. And my last statement was, we can always use community support. So if you're seeing people outside congregating, kids, they may not have their masks on if they're out in public, please give them a gentle reminder. As I mentioned and I laugh at, they see me, they seem to put their masks on. So, I'm just, if everybody could just give gentle reminders, even when we're out in public, that we need to be following all the rules that we do in school, because they're really doing a great job in school. So that concludes my report. Thank you.
Dr. O'Connell, I have a question.
Yes.
One of the items that was mentioned in your K-12 is that if testing is going to take place, it'll take place at some location in the district. And more than one person mentioned to me, they were wondering, would that place be in one of the school buildings, or would it be at some other location separate from the school buildings?
So the COVID coordinator team is zeroing in on a school building. We're playing out a few different scenarios. So at this point, we didn't call it as to which one it is. But part of our process is we want the person who is tested to remain so until they get their results, Josh. So they would need to then be in their car in the parking lot waiting for us to give the results. So most likely it's going to be a school. But before we final, I didn't want to send out too many details in case we, change after we talk to the Department of Health and when we collaborate with them. But most likely it would be a school.
Right. I think the concern that I would have is how we ensure that, since if we determine that someone is positive, or if they're going to wait in their car, I just think the logistics of it are tricky, so that it doesn't present a further contamination issue inside the building.
So we've been giving that extreme thought and making sure the processes and protocols are such that the person is not in the building. Any person that is coming in for testing isn't in the building. I did have the good fortune of going to another district this week that is in a yellow zone. And I did watch the procedure there. And the person was in and out of the building in such a short time, and waited the bulk of the time out in their car.
Got it. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Dr. O'Connell, you said that we would, if we became a zone, that we would hear. I'm just curious, does that come from the governor's office, from the health department? It's not something that we determine.
Correct.
Yeah.
We don't determine the zone. The governor and the state determines the zone. And from what I'm told, although there is a zone checker, you can do it online. I do plunk in our address every day. But I'm told that I will receive notification from the state, which I think is the Department of Health, as superintendent. Again, they have the zone detector. They don't call it the zone detector, but something like that. You can plunk your address in and see if you're in a zone. But it is the state, Andrea. We don't.
Any other questions?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. O'Connell. We will now move on to our Assistant Superintendent for Business report. So I will turn this over to Denise Harrington-Cohen, and she will give us the a preliminary budget discussion for the 2021-22 school year.
Thank you, Ms. Carrier. I am going to share my screen and just ask, because I have dual monitors, I'm just going to ask for a confirmation that you can see just the budget presentation slide. Yes? Okay. I'm just going to move my people over here. So good evening and welcome to our preliminary 2021-22 budget discussion. This is going to be a very high level view, and I ask, I'm going to move through. Please speak up if you have any questions. I'll try to take a pause midway as well. So as you can see through our photos, it's a little bit different look than we're accustomed to seeing. I'm going to briefly overview our budget timeline and put a little COVID indicator there so that we're all aware that things can change at any moment. So in September, we review our assumptions, analyze historical data, and begin to develop forecasts. Then in October, we create our budget development calendar, which was recently approved. And then we begin to look at our revenue and expenditures. November is really a time for establishing partners with our principals and directors and engaging in collaborative conversations with cabinet and instructional leaders to determine the goals and priorities for the budget. Is my screen moving over there? It's not moving over here. Are we on December? Yes, okay. So then in December, we have our preliminary budget discussion. And as a district, we have issued a spending moratorium so that we can collect some data as far as where we are with our expenditures and our revenues to determine if we need to take a permanent pause or reopen our spending. And then in January, we hope to receive the executive budget, the tentative budget from the governor. And we will also on January 6th be having a Budget 101 session. Then in February, we will have another work session and a presentation, and the New York State Teachers Retirement System will publish their employer contribution rate. So as an employer, we contribute to both the employees' retirement system and the teachers' retirement system. We have an employer contribution rate, and it's a significant portion of our budget, so we will anticipate that. Then in March, we will submit our allowable tax levy and also have Budget Saturday and vote on our budget proposition. April, the governor's budget will hopefully be secured and the Board of Education will adopt the budget, and we will also submit our property tax report card, which is another requirement. And then in May, we will have our public budget hearing, and to conclude on May 18th with our public vote, which will be ideally at the high school. So vision is at the core of our budget development, and certainly in the face of COVID, we need to keep our eye very closely on this because we can lose sight of our goals very easily with the many competing interests that we are facing. So the board's vision is ensuring that all students will develop the habits of mind and social skills to become lifelong learners and able to contribute to the well-being of society. And we keep our full attention on that priority during our budget discussions. The Croton-Harmon Board of Education Strategic Coherence Plan is based on the theory that these actions support their vision. So challenging our students, creating partnerships with the broader school community, cultivating a climate of respect, honoring and valuing our teachers as essential, and instilling commitment to future responsibility. So balancing student need and fiscal responsibility is a very tall order and certainly is far more complicated now. I will go through these. The first budget priority is to preserve the integrity of our quality educational programs, support the goals of our Board of Education, remain fiscally responsible and in compliance with the allowable tax levy, meet our contractual obligations, align staffing with our enrollment, and comply with all federal, state, and state mandates. And of course, now we have a new component, which is not even a component. It's a lens, a blanket that is woven into every aspect of our operations. So what has COVID done? So this is an overview slide, and I apologize because the visual is a little blurred. It was downloaded from the state controller's office, but I will tell you what's going on here. So the first graph on the upper left chart shows that the COVID-19 recession, which it is being called, rightfully so, has caused a loss of close to 2 million jobs in New York State just in March and April. If you look at the lower graph on the left-hand side, historical enrollment outlays totaling nearly $42 billion have been processed by the state. And then the larger one on the right-hand side with the yellow circle around it, this represents the quarterly sales tax for Westchester County. We are right here in Mid-Hudson. The blue line above the median line is our first quarter sales tax. The orange line, which is below, is the second quarter sales tax earnings, and then the gray is the third quarter. We are, though it's up in the third quarter, we are expecting a downturn again in the fourth quarter. And Westchester County sales tax represents a considerable portion of our revenue, which I will talk about briefly later. And then lastly, tourism is down by 72%, loss of approximately $38 billion just in this year alone. So what are the implications of these trends for New York State? These are some of the highlights from a mid-year fiscal update that was issued by the State Controller's Office at the Division of the Budget. The first, general fund revenues declined by $15 billion, with revenues expected to drop by $63 billion through 2024. Secondly, the state anticipates, without federal aid, that we will see significant reductions in education and healthcare funding. Thirdly, the Division of the Budget has already cut $2.4 billion in local aid payments. To date, Croton-Harmon has lost about $122,000, and that is just from last year's aid that we were that was booked as a receivable for this year that we have since had to write off. And then lastly, transportation aid, we are expecting potentially another $270,000 in transportation aid loss. So currently, under education law, transportation expenses incurred for things other than the transport of students to and from school are not eligible for reimbursement. So during COVID, when we were delivering instructional materials, paying to have our staff on hand with the 2-week interval updates and delivering meals, they are saying that at this point in time, those costs are not reimbursable. So we have some advocacy efforts on behalf of the board and our other local affiliations that we will talk about later. I think I'll pause for a second to see if we have any questions so far before I move on. And I apologize, I can't see everyone, so you would have to speak up. No? Okay. So What are the fiscal implications and trends for our district? Let's first look at the impact on revenue. So up to 20% of aid is being is the magic number according to the controller's office. However, we are not sure if this is going to be holdback funds, cuts, if it's going to be through a pandemic adjustment, unclear of that. We're not sure if it's just the foundation aid formula or if it is going to apply to expense-based aids. They're also talking about the potential consolidation of expense-based aids with foundation aid. And that was a game that they played last year where they kind of mixed everything together where we couldn't really identify where the cuts were. Another implication is the Westchester County sales tax. So loss in Westchester County sales tax due to the shutdown. Fortunately, we've only seen about a $10,000 loss. Oh, incidentally, I don't know if I reported that if we receive a 20% aid reduction, it's equivalent to approximately $1.1 million in aid loss. Next, interest income. We invested in some very lucrative investments last year, and our interest was extremely high this year. There are essentially no interests coming in, so we are looking at a loss of approximately $100,000. And then lastly, the allowable tax levy and its impact on the tax cap and the CPI, which is an indicator for our tax cap adjustment. So let's talk about the tax cap. Some of the key elements are to the allowable tax levy, also known as the tax cap formula, will have a significant impact on our levy. So the tax base growth factor. This is calculated by the Department of Taxation and Finance. It's essentially a brick and mortar construction, any growth within our community and tax base, either new construction or growth on existing properties. This number came in, we received it last week, surprisingly low, devastatingly low. So it went from 0.0056 to 0.0022, which shows, depressed growth. That loss in our tax cap formula is approximately $139,000. I will caution you and say that this number has changed before. It has not changed for us, but I've seen the number change for other districts. And my hope is that because everything has slowed down, that these numbers are going to be updated and that we are not going to have the impact that we expect. Secondly, the ALGF, that's the allowable growth factor, which is essentially based on the CPI. That is trending now at 1.43%. It's expected to land between 1.2 and 1.5%. Anything below the 2% tax cap that we had expected to see will impact the tax levy considerably, and I'll talk about that again later. Next, we have debt, capital debt. So the capital debt exclusion is a component of the tax cap that takes into account our anticipated debt for the subsequent year, transportation aid, and building aid. So we'll be looking very closely at the debt component so that we can seek to strategize once we know where we stand with transportation aid and building aid. And also simultaneously time the submission of our final cost reports so that we can generate aid at a time that is beneficial to the district. State aid. So again, building aid and transportation aid are woven into that formula and represent a big piece of the deduct. So this is another bad image downloaded from the state, but I just wanted to point out. So this is the tax cap history. We, again, it's trending at 1.43%. If you look at the bottom of the screen, this illustrates the loss that we would receive if we did not get the 2% CPI. So if the CPI, also the allowable growth factor, same thing essentially, if that comes in at 1.25%, we could see a loss of about 286,000. 1.5, a loss of 191,000, 1.75, a loss of 95,000.
I'm sorry, Denise.
Yes.
What was last year's ALGF?
I'm going to go to that right now. You're ahead of me. Okay. So this is
Funny that.
This is a history. So as you can see, the tax cap was supposed to be a 2% tax cap. But if you look here, the ALGF, since 2014, we've only seen 2% once. And the overall growth from this factor is less than 1.5%. So last year it was 1.81, Josh. And if you go to the third column, our tax-based growth factor was 1.0056, now down to 1.022. So the tax-based growth factor, as you can see, has inconsequential growth there with the 0.0008. So next we have an overview of our revenue. So this is pre-COVID revenue. 1 second here, let me just make that larger. So the larger gear is our local tax revenue, which represents approximately $40.8 million. This is revenue generated from our local tax levy. As you recall, last year, the district reduced the taxpayer burden by $500,000 in consideration of COVID. And in addition to that, we authorized the utilization of fund balance to balance the budget. The fund balance portion was 2.29%, and that is a regularly utilized support to the budget throughout Westchester County in particular. State aid was at 5.59 approximately, and that includes foundation aid, excess cost aid, and the expense-based aid, BOCES, transportation, building, lottery aid, etc. The remaining $700,000 was primarily interest earnings and Westchester County sales tax, in addition to some rental of facilities, refund prior year, and some non-resident tuition rates, income. The expenditure side is a little bit more complex. So the first component is salaries and collective bargaining provisions. So salaries represent 50% of our budget. We currently have 2 contracts that are expired, our ATU contract and our CSEA custodial. In addition to that, upcoming expiring on June of 2021, we have our teachers contract, our aides contract, and our clerical contract. And this is a function of the 2 contracts that have expired that are currently not settled. They were, excuse me. They, when we began negotiations as soon as COVID hit. So that is an open consideration that will impact our projections. Secondly, retirement costs. So pension costs are close to $3 million of our budget. ERS is coming in at, well, I'll get into that later. ERS represents approximately a little under $1 million of our budget, and then TRS, New York State Teachers Retirement System, and New York State Employer Retirement System. And TRS represents close to $2 million of our budget. Health insurance premium. Currently, we've approved a 1.5 increase to health insurance premiums. We have the Putnam Northern Westchester Health Consortium, which is a very well-managed consortium with local districts, has a considerable fund balance that they are utilizing to keep our rates low. In addition to that, our health insurance premiums range from we have some bargaining units that are at 12.5%. Our administrators are at 20%. Our teachers are at 17.5%, and so on. So each of our bargaining units and our benefit agreements all contribute to the health insurance plan at varying percentages. So that is factored into that as well. Fourthly, special education costs. This represents approximately 12% of our budget, about $5.7 million. This is a very difficult cost to project. It includes out-of-district placements, one-to-one aides, BOCES programs, related services such as speech, OT, PT, etc. Large budget driver, difficult to project. Oh. Apologies. Next, we have instructional initiatives and tech needs. We are facing infrastructure needs, equipment needs. We have cybersecurity needs. This will be a big factor in our budget for this year. And we are meeting and evaluating those needs with our principals and directors. Debt service and interfund transfers. Debt service, fortunately, because of our AA2 Moody's rating and really good timing, we were able to capitalize on low interest rates when bonding our capital project, the $20.82 million project that we bonded last year. But those financing fees are encompassed into debt service. And then we also have our school lunch fund, interfund transfers, which our school lunch fund is running at a severe deficit. And we have to fund that deficit through general fund monies. 7, done it again, is our aging infrastructure. So as you may recall, our 5-year plan, which was up, has now been pushed out to 2024. And that is going to impact our infrastructure and our capital needs. So we need to look at that. And then lastly, state and federal mandates with regard to Ed Law 2D, CARES, ESSA, transparency, special education needs, and of course, COVID. So, brief recap of some variables and unknowns. Revenue, our final state aid amounts are undetermined. We did receive some aid runs actually this afternoon that I have reviewed. I don't have a lot of faith in them. Our transportation appeared to go up, even though we lost transportation aid. Our foundation aid was stable. Our excess cost aid went down, and our building aid went down considerably. I'm concerned about the validity of that data, and I don't think it is wise to base any decisions on that until it's explored a little bit closer and deeper. Revenue, will there be a federal stimulus package to restore some of the state aid cuts? That's remains to be seen. Hopefully, when the new administration comes in, there will be support to New York State. And of course, the implications on the allowable tax levy and other revenue sources that we've discussed. On the expenditure side, what is the impact of COVID on enrollment, incoming kindergarten and beyond? How will that affect, people coming from the city up to our community? How will it affect homeschooling? Various issues there, very unknown demographically. Contract settlements and healthcare costs. We have some contracts to settle, and these are the predictions for healthcare costs and retirement costs. Special education classifications and English as new language learners. We're not sure where that will fall, but those all come at a cost. Unexpected leave replacements, retirements, staffing shortages. How will they impact the budget? New mandates, the cost of cleaning supplies, technology upgrades, HVAC upgrades, etc. And of course, the looming risk of additional COVID outbreaks. Next steps. So we will await the allowable tax levy factors and create debt scenarios to meet those figures. We will innovate and enhance, continue to explore innovative options for reducing our expenditures, creating efficiencies, and enhancing the quality programs that we already have in place in support of our students and staff. Evaluate instructional needs, continue to evaluate our instructional needs and staffing needs in regard to our enrollment trends. And lastly, advocacy. Advocate for state aid restoration, but prepare for potential reductions. With regard to advocacy, on this page, you will see the board has put up on voter voice. They're advocating, and I encourage everyone to sign up. It's very easy. This link right here will bring you right on to voter voice, where you can contact all of the political policymakers and vote to look at transportation aid and also COVID screening and surveillance testing. A look ahead. January 6th, we have our Budget 101, 5:30 to 6:30, either live or virtually. I will keep everyone updated. January 7th, we have our preliminary 2021 budget report. February 25th is our budget work session. March 20th, budget Saturday. April 20th, our budget adoption. Oops, I see a typo there, 21, 22. May 6th, public budget hearing. And then May 18th will be our annual voting day for our budget and bus proposition. Questions? Comments? It's a lot to take in. A lot to take in. We have a lot of work ahead of us.
Denise?
Yeah.
Am I correct in understanding? I'm pretty sure I'm correct in this, that the process is roughly the same as it has been in prior years. It's just that there are way more unknowns now.
Correct.
And
Way more.
okay.
Oh, way. I'm sorry, did someone else say something? Sarah? No?
Anyone else have any other questions for Denise?
Pardon?
Okay. Yeah.
More?
There's a lot for us all to digest, and then we will regroup and be ready to listen to the preliminary report at our next business meeting on January 7th. Thank you very much, Denise.
Sarah, if I may, before we close. He doesn't look threatening there, does he? So sometimes an extraordinary disruption, such as a pandemic, requires an organization and a community to really step up boldly. And I have to say, in the face of this monster, despite adequate time for strategic planning, this community has mobilized in such an incredible way with intention. We've navigated the legal and legislative changes and mandates and demands despite the huge learning curve. We've secured and distributed technology. We opened on time. Our teachers have pivoted, flipped, jumped through hoops in almost every aspect of their roles. They've had to change. We've provided meals to our remote and on-site learners. We became overnight experts in MERV 13 filtration, N95 signage placement, and scarcity procurement, all to ensure the safety of our students. Our teachers and administrators have jumped into action to create learning plans and meaningful instruction. Our parents have invested time in stakeholder meetings and have been supported through the many difficult transition. And our students have been challenged every day and really risen to the occasion. And none of this could have been done without all of us, our aides, our monitors, our clerical staff, our custodians, our principals, our teachers, our Board of Education, our students, our parents, everyone, and I apologize if I've left anyone out. So, though there are challenges ahead, I have faith in this community and we will prevail. And in the words of our fearless leader, Dr. Deborah O'Connell, we are small but mighty and Croton strong. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise. All right, so we will now move on to new business.
But before you move it,
Yes.
I need to make a slight change.
Okay.
But I think we could announce what the topic is, and then I'll make the slight change before we actually make the motion.
Okay. All right, so we will be discussing a resolution on the appointment of a public school educator as Secretary of Education. And you had a change?
Yes, the slight change is, I apologize to Tracy and to the board members if there was confusion over my response on this, but in the first resolve.
Yeah, I got.
It's
as
it
prerequisite.
should be treated as prerequisite, not as a. We were confused as the order, and I actually didn't have it in front of me when we were having that email conversation. So,
all right. Shall I I'll make the recommended action now and read out the resolution? Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the resolution on appointment of a public school educator as Secretary of Education as presented. Whereas the Croton-Harmon Union Free School District's mission is to support all students in developing skills that enable them to become effective communicators, problem solvers, and researchers who are independent learners responsible for their own learning. And whereas we are committed to preserving a school system that supports achieving that mission, and whereas recent events have presented unprecedented challenges to schools, school districts, municipalities, and state governments, and whereas school districts must provide instruction to every student according to their needs and abilities, and whereas the past several years have seen continuously shifting yet growing mandates upon public schools to modify and enhance their programs without any concomitant increase in funding or support to schools from the United States government, and whereas dedicated funding and rationalization of mandates is needed to stabilize public school operations for the next school year and beyond, and whereas senior educational leadership in the federal government across administrations of both major parties has recently been provided by individuals who are not, and have never been educators in public schools, and even by individuals who have never attended a public school and whose children did not attend public schools. And whereas significant experience in public schools is a major factor in the ability of educational leaders to understand the needs of public schools and public school students, and the means and processes by which those needs may be addressed. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the Croton-Harmon Union Free School District calls on President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., to appoint a highly experienced public school educator with classroom experience to the position of United States Secretary of Education, and resolved that experience as a public school educator be treated as prerequisite for appointment to any senior position in the United States Department of Education. And resolved that the Croton-Harmon Union Free School District calls upon the Senate of the United States to confirm such appointments promptly and without impediment. And further be it resolved that that the Board of Education of the Croton-Harmon Union Free School District directs the district clerk to transmit a copy of this resolution to President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., the Honorable United States Senator Charles Schumer, the Honorable United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, the Honorable United States Congresswoman Nita Lowey, the Honorable United States Congressman-elect Mondaire Jones. And be it further resolved that a copy of this resolution be posted on the website of the Croton-Harmon Union Free School District and on other social media utilized by the district. Can I get someone make that motion?
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
Okay.
On the question? Neil?
Unfortunately, while I believe in all of the sentiments in the whereases, when it comes to the therefores, I have major concerns about what is being asked for two reasons. The first is, and they both relate, they're connected. They both relate to the fact that the role of the Department of Education is much greater than simply K-12 education. It also involves college loan programs. It involves, and I'm looking at the website now, trying to pull up some of the things that it involves, administration of Pell Grants. It involves different grants and financial aid to institutions, not just schools, but not public schools, K-12, but also colleges and vocational programs, and a lot of things that fall outside of the purview of K-12 public education. So when I look at the second part of this, resolve that experience as a public school educator be treated as a prerequisite for appointment to any senior position in the United States Department of Education, which would include perhaps the general counsel of the Department of Education, the parties that deal with administration of loan programs, the parties that deal with administration of programs not related to K-12. I am concerned that what we would be asking is something that would be unduly restrictive. That's point number one. And I apologize for not having focused on this earlier, but due to personal obligations, I really haven't been focused that much on the board work for the last couple of weeks. Secondly, related to that, because public education is so directly related to what we are, if I'll call it outcomes, which is how students, as we want to create problem solvers, and looking at our mission, I won't go through it all. It may not be that the best person to be the Secretary of Education would be someone who is a public school um, has public school direct teaching experience, as opposed to someone else who has experience in education, but not necessarily at the K-12 level. And I've been reading some things where it has been suggested, for example, that a community college president, someone who may not have K-12 experience, but someone who understands education from the perspective of the outcome of K-12 and how that will be able to build upon, or those successes can build upon secondary education or vocational training, may be the appropriate person for that, to lead the department. Not necessarily saying that the person who is the assistant secretary or deputy secretary for elementary and secondary education should not be a person who has teaching experience, but the secretary of education, perhaps not. Thirdly, my concern is that if we say that treating as prerequisite for appointment is someone who is a highly experienced public school educator with classroom experience, that in some way is too broad, because we have had the experience in the last decade or so of the appointments of people who fit that prerequisite, who really have not been supportive of public education. There was a lot of criticism of people like Arnie Duncan, who, while he had public education experience, was really focused on supporting the concept of public charter schools, which may not be what we believe, or certainly what I believe, is the best for public education. And so, for these reasons, I think, in a way, this resolution sweeps too broadly in some respect and too narrowly in other respects. I agree with everything in the whereases, but I am not sure that we want to have the wherefores, therefores that we have at the in the resolution, the first two resolves. I would add that, as we know, the current president-elect has said that he will appoint a public school educator, which raises one other question, and that's the internal debate that we are seeing, which is whether a public school educator means that an appointee will be someone who, in essence, comes directly out of a public school teacher union environment, which also may not be the best for the processing and the policy initiatives that we are talking about. And I'm saying it wouldn't, I'm not saying that it would. So for those reasons, as I've had the opportunity to review this, I am not in favor.
As I think about it, you do make a good point about the second, the resolve that experience as a public school educator be treated as prerequisite to any senior position. And I think I might want to move to amend that to read, calls upon this be treated as prerequisite for appointment to any senior position in the United States Department of Education pertaining to public schools. Or
I wonder if we
Because I
should
think that would
take this away and,
addresses the issue,
revise it.
takes aside the part of the, you know, the other non-curriculum related kind of stuff, right? Or pertaining to the curriculum of public schools, perhaps.
I think, I don't know if you can hear me, but rather than amend, oh, okay. Good. Rather than, step through amending, and editing here on this meeting, I wonder if we should table it and revise it and then present it again.
I think that might be a good option.
I'm sorry, I can't hear it.
I said, I think that might be a good option if we look at some of the other, did anyone else have? Iris first.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, just also want to, I echo everything that Neil said, and not in terms of wordsmithing. I also am concerned, I'm not sure about making a prerequisite for any position, like a job requirement. It would have to really be so tailored, because especially if we're talking about systematic changes needing to occur, I'm really concerned if you're saying there's something in the system that needs to be looked at and reevaluated. I'm not sure if dismissing automatically anyone that may have a focus and a dedication to public education and to this type of work, saying, well, you can't apply because you've never went to public school, or you've never been a teacher. So I'm just concerned that if we are saying that there are certain things that are in the system that needs to be changed, sometimes it's easy to change from within, but sometimes some things may require someone that has dedication. To me, it's more about having a commitment to supporting and continuing public education and enriching it, and not devaluing it, more so than necessarily how did you come to get to that place. So I think when you go back and you look at it, that's a concern that I have, in addition to the ones mentioned by Neil.
I was just going to say that this particular resolution is handled a little differently because of the timing. So usually we have a chance to really discuss this, before it's presented. So, I thank Josh for stepping forward, for being timely about it, but we could only discuss it in public, and I am in complete agreement with Neil. So I'm looking forward to seeing a revised version.
I'm just afraid that by the time we make a revised version, there will already be an appointment. I expect an appointment within the next 5 days, from what I've been reading.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That's the concern. And that's the only reason I pushed it forward this quickly.
No, we appreciate that.
And I would be amenable to just striking the prerequisite paragraph and make it more aspirational, and remove the prerequisite, if that makes it more amenable to my fellow board members.
Do you mean remove that entire result?
Yeah. Yeah.
But leave the first.
But leave the first, yes.
Experience, public school, educator, classroom
Right.
experience, to the position of secretary.
Right, and the reason that I call for this, and that I'm suggesting it, is that we've just had 4 years of someone who has zero experience as a public school educator, zero experience attending a public school, zero attendance with her children attending public schools. And it has been devastating to the educational system of this country. And I think that is important for, frankly, a contrast to that for the next 4 years. That's the argument.
Andrew?
I was just going to say, though, I think a really important role that Neil emphasized is this higher education role with student loans and Pell Grants. So I don't know if there's a way that you can include that. I'm not sure that I agree that we want to say that we want a K-12 educator for,
It doesn't say that.
well, yeah,
It says a public school educator, and public schools include public universities.
right.
Maybe
That's true.
maybe that's the side that you indicated.
But I think it needs that something needs to go in about that role, because it really is like a key role. And I really appreciate what you're saying about our present secretary.
Yeah.
Yes, I would suggest that if our concern is someone who is, who addresses the whereases, I said before, is not the selection of someone who is a highly experienced public school educator with classroom experiences. It is selecting someone who embodies and demonstrates a commitment to public school education and to ensure that public school education is a highest priority within the policies of the Department of Education in the next president's administration. That is really what we want.
That's true. That's true. Very, very well put.
So,
And that really is the intent.
and I understand. So let me try. Okay, you gotta. Let me try to craft an amendment. The amendment would be to, and Tracy, you take this down because I'm not writing it. Therefore, be it resolved that the Croton Harmon Union Free School District urges the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., to appoint as Secretary of Education and as senior administrators with responsibility for public education matters, individuals who have a demonstrated commitment to the public education system and to enhancing the, and I need the right word here, the success of all students. And then the second whereas, resolved rather, would be eliminated. So that is, and Tracy, if you have it, you can read it back so that everybody can hear it. That is my proposed amendment. Go ahead.
You mentioned that to ensure that public education is of the highest priority in policies of the Department of Education. I thought that was a
Yep. Yep. Okay. So why don't you read what I dictated, and then let's add in public education, the highest priorities at an appropriate point.
Who will treat public education as the highest priority, or something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to read it too?
Yes,
Yes,
please
please.
read it, Tracy.
Okay,
You
resolved.
need to unmute.
I don't, not on anything.
Oh, okay.
I don't have a.
Can you, I thought you were the community.
Oh,
manager.
sorry. Will the real community rooms person stand up?
Can they hear me?
They can hear you.
Okay, great.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Now I have to find it. Okay. Resolved. There it is. Now therefore be it resolved that the Croton Harmon Union Free School District calls on the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. to, or well, Neil put, urges the President-elect, urges the President-elect of the United States, Joseph Biden Jr. to elect to the, where am I? Hold on. Right, to appoint as Secretary of Education and as Senior Administrator with responsibility with public education matters, individuals who have demonstrated commitment to the public education system and to enhancing the success of all students.
Then, and who will be committed to public education as the highest priority.
You're muted.
You have to take that volume off.
Okay, try this. And who is committed, who are committed
Oh, I can't.
to,
I'm sorry.
Wait a minute, hold on. And who
are committed
are committed
to public education as the highest priority of the Department of Education.
Oh,
You didn't have the word policies in there. You had said originally to ensure public education is the highest priority in the policies of the Department of Education. Yes, who will ensure that public education is the highest priority in policies of the Department of Education. Your words, Neil, they're good. Ensure that public education
Where was this?
at the end,
At the success of all students and
And
will ensure.
who will ensure,
And who, okay, will
ensure
ensure
that public education is the highest priority in policies of the Department of Education.
Actually, I don't want to say the highest priority. Right. When you have policies regarding private colleges and universities, Title IX.
As a priority, then.
As a priority.
As a priority, not the highest priority in the last line, a priority.
a priority. I've got it all written down, teacher.
So with those changes, so recommended action that the Board of Education approves the resolution as amended.
So moved.
Well, no, we have to We have to vote on the amendment.
That's what we're doing.
Well, that's what,
She's moving the amendment.
Moving the amendment.
I'm gonna move the amendment.
Okay, well, I guess I should move the amendment because I'm the one who wrote
There
it,
you go.
but you seconded it.
All right, I've seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. Yep,
I think, should we send a copy to West Putt as well?
we can certainly do that, yes.
I don't think you need to amend in order to say that.
No.
I think we now have to vote. on-
Now we vote on the amended
Right.
resolution, so, okay. Recommended action that the Board of Education approves the amended resolution on the appointment of we're gonna have to change the title too. On the Secretary of Education as amended.
So moved.
Oh, yeah.
Did I get a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I
Oppose,
thank,
abstain, motion carries. Thank you very much for your work on this, Josh, and thank you, Neil, for your clarification and updates to get, I think, a strong resolution that we can send out in a timely manner.
and I appreciate the board's indulgence with the quick wordsmithing tonight. I know we don't usually do that, but given the time urgency, I think it was worth it. Thank you.
Yes. All right. And with that, we will move on to ongoing business. So now we are up to recommended action that the Board of Education conduct a second reading of and adopt the following board policies as presented. 6,000 fiscal management goals, which is a revision. 6110 budget planning, which is a revision. 6110R budget planning regulation, which is a new policy. And 6200, which is revenue, which is a revision. Now, we had a first reading of these at our last meeting. Did anyone have any questions for Neil?
I think we first need to move this resolution, which I will move.
Yeah. Can I get a
Second.
second?
I think it was Iris.
I will,
Alright.
I will-
Yep,
wait.
on the
I-
question?
Yep, any questions? Josh provided one change to policy 66,000, I think it was, which has been included.
Great.
It was not substantive, and if there was no other comments, so if everyone is okay, let's move forward.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, we will now move on to 4.2. Recommended action that the Board of Education conduct a second reading and rescind the following board policies as presented. You will see the list of them there.
So moved.
Can I
Second.
get a second?
Iris seconded again.
Oh, okay. On the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, thank you. We will now move on to donations. Recommended action that the Board of Education gratefully accepts a grant from the Croton Harmon Education Foundation, CHEF, in the amount of $4,318.65 for the purchase of remote learning tools consisting of tablets, iPads, and stylus for the Croton Harmon High School Math Department.
So moved.
Okay. All right, and Nia and I are seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Sorry, any questions?
I have, oh, hang on,
I have just one. I think that should be stylus says.
Stylus is an apostrophe at the end there. All right, and Iris, did you have a question?
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to acknowledge just how fortunate we are to have an organization like Chef who can step in and help to enrich our students in this way, as well as, you know, what our PTAs do. I just think our community is so incredibly fortunate when you hear districts around the state that haven't been able to provide for their students. So I just want to take this moment to just personally say thank you to what our organizations are doing for us and our students.
Absolutely. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Oppose, abstain, Motion carries. All right. 5.2, recommended action that the Board of Education gratefully accepts a donation in the amount of $325 from Marissa Warren and Jeremy Reed as a contribution to the class of 2024 at the Croton Harmon High School.
So moved.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right. On the question. All right. All in favor? Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. 5.3, recommended action that the Board of Education gratefully accept a donation of $500 from the Stephen and Leslie Pollock from the Lucille and Maurice Pollock Fund, the Jean and Henry Pollock Division. $250 will be applied toward the chess and math programs at Pierre Van Cortlandt Middle School, and $250 will be applied to the Mandarin program at the Croton Harmon High School. I'm sorry, Mandarin program and Croton Harmon High School.
So moved.
Okay, and Iris seconded. On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, we will now move into instructional personnel. Not perhaps super willingly, I will recommended action. Be it resolved that the Board of Education of the Croton Harmon Union Free School District hereby accepts the resignation of Dr. Deborah O'Connell, Superintendent of Schools, for the purpose of retirement effective January 4th, 2022. Oh, no one's gonna move it. Sorry.
I'll forward it.
So moved.
Right?
Did Brian move it? Okay. Can I get a second? Josh, a second?
Regretfully.
Yes. All in favor?
Aye.
Come on, guys.
Regretfully.
Aye.
I know. None of us want to, but oppose, abstain, motion carries. I think that is some indication of how much we don't wish that this is on here, but we do wish you absolutely all of the best. And we have some time, so we will take advantage of it. All right. Now we are on to the consent agenda. Recommended action, the Board of Education approves all items in the consent agenda. Iris moved. Neil has seconded. On the question? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right, and now we will move into the closing of the meeting. This would again be our time for our second hearing of the public, but as we do not have any public with us, we will move into board reports. So we can start off with advocacy. Andrea.
Well, we sort of touched on a lot of advocacy issues already this evening, especially in as they pertain to the budget. And recently, West Putt has had a number of roundtable discussions. I attended one, and there's really a very strong feeling among school boards that we will really have to advocate hard for funds, for funding, and that, you know, we will have to really work closely with the public to get heard, because it's, you know, our state is in rough shape, and we know from the past how the governor tends to work with schools when he has to balance his budget. So it's just sort of like after looking at that budget, we all need to sort of buckle up and see what's, you know, get ready for what's coming. There aren't any specific initiatives that are ready right now. There was some question about a bill that would give all schools a 2% like a real 2%, that they would get a 2% increase to help them through this year. So we'll see how that develops. Neil, do you want to step forward because you were talking about how NISBA just came forward with about the transportation aid looking for public support?
Sure. Well, the NISBA sent an advocacy alert to board members talking specifically about the transportation aid issue that Denise brought up early, and I guess, yeah, Denise brought up earlier about the fact that we may get hit with $280,000 of unreimbursed expenses because while we kept our transportation department on staff and working, they were not transporting students, and therefore, under the laws, it's now written, no aid can be provided. The statement that NISBA provided was that according to someone who is in the division of the budget, speaking in, I think, either speaking on a radio program or in some kind of a release, that individual said, we understand, and if we, and there should be reimbursement in essence, if for those school districts who actually engaged in the use of their transportation departments for those processes, and we're going to work on it. Now, that's just a statement by one administrator in perhaps the bowels of state government. So I think really the advocacy to hold their feet to the fire and have them do what this one person said would be done is is something that will be important. Two other things that I would note is it is my understanding from what press reports that I've read is that the Democratic State Senate and the Democratic Assembly, or rather State Senate and Assembly, will both have supermajorities among the Democratic senators and assemblypersons, which could change the dynamics somewhat of the governor doing what the governor does if the legislators have more spine or backbone in certain areas. I don't know if that will happen, but it is something to keep in mind, particularly when you're talking about things like the budget, the 2% tax levy cap being a real 2% for this year or something like that. The last thing that I will note is that we have a new member of Congress representing this community, and we don't know what the makeup of the United States Senate will be, and we know that the split between or the advantage that Democrats have in the House of Representatives is not as great as it is in the current Congress, but I think that is an opportunity that we should utilize as a district and as a community to really get our new member, a new congressperson, focused on education, perhaps in a way that our prior congresswoman, who was very, did a lot of good work, but may not have focused on education that much. And I think we should try to utilize connections and relationships to, in essence, educate, in the small E word, our new congressperson to really become, as much as we can, an advocate for the things that we believe in, and I sense he believes in as well.
And just to follow up on that, Neil, there was a discussion. It is interesting because usually there's a lot of advocacy on the state level when it comes to education, but there are really opportunities on the federal level, especially with funding right now. So there was a call to actually have some sort of event where our new Congressman, Ondare Jones, will be called to have some sort of town hall with other local representatives to really help. Oh, and some of the other local congressmen in Westchester, Jamal Bowman, have him come in to really understand more about what the issues are. So it's exciting. There's there's going to be a lot that changes. And that's it for advocacy. Unless Sarah, do you have anything you want to join?
I just wanted to note that Jamal Bowman is who's
A school teacher.
He is a former
Yeah.
middle school principal in the city.
Right.
So he really understands, the plight of
Classroom
public education.
Yep.
Right.
Neil, Andrea, is there anything that you, as the advocacy committee, need from, and Sarah, I'm sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
And Sarah, need from the board or from the district in the way of information that could help your outreach to the public to get them engaged in this conversation?
So we have talked with communications that we would like to get a social media campaign going around the transportation aid. So that really should be going forward to really help promote that. And then there will be a questionnaire going out to business officials, not immediately, probably in January, to help sort of elicit information from all districts in the Westchester Putnam area with sort of like an apples to apples, so that we can start really figuring out what the expenses have been around COVID and other mandates to do some, to provide data for our legislators and to really help with advocacy.
I'm actually thinking about this more in terms of how we get our local community members excited about doing advocacy work and participating and amplifying our voices.
Well, we have a communications meeting on Tuesday, so
Yeah,
let's discuss it then.
Let's table it till then.
Yeah,
That's fine.
and I think we should go forward with what we've already put out and work on amplifying that. I think that will be really helpful because those are two really key local issues. The one about testing may have changed somewhat. We need to review that, but we could do that on Tuesday because now we are getting the free tests.
Oh, okay, thanks.
All right. And then Iris, did you have, we had our learning session earlier in the meeting, but we also have had some other things going on with board development. So if you want to just bring it up to date.
I'm so sorry, guys. I'm trying not to fade here. I just want to let the board know our next work session will have in the beginning sustainability. Working on the goal discussion will be on the sustainability, and Sarah will give you, I think, the homework assignment.
I've been working with Carrie. Somebody else. Okay, I've been working with Carrie Bianchi, who is the co-chair of our sustainability, our district-wide sustainability committee, in terms of getting some materials for you guys. I think what we were envisioning the learning session at the next meeting to be is more of a kind of a step back and make sure everybody's on the same page as to what we mean when we say, looking to create a more environmentally sustainable school district. And I think similar to what we talked about earlier tonight with regards to equity, having everybody on the same page and having a common definition matters. So I think making sure we sort of start from there and that we're at a good spot before we get the audit back from the energy performance contract, that audit data back at the beginning of 2021, right, Denise? So at the end of January, we'll be getting that. So I think sort of getting us up to speed there. So that's what it will be. The materials will be forthcoming. It's looking like it's probably going to be more stuff to read versus a video to watch. I apologize. I haven't found any good snappy videos. So.
And then the retreat in January, everyone will receive a doodle from board development. So just let us know your availability so we can book that with Natalie. That will be more in depth. We realized this was a very abridged conversation. And also the last thing I was saying when my Wi-Fi was acting a little weird was that we want to know what would be helpful. What would you like to see to help you as we continue on this goal learning discussions? So in terms of equity, do you want a speaker and do you want materials to read? Do you want to try to look at different definitions of different words, etc.? So just email board development with that info.
So communications met on the 10th of November, as usual, on the in the week immediately following the previous business meeting, and handled a. I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes from that meeting, and discussed several continued communication items related to the last meeting concerning Dr. O'Connell's pending resignation, concerning the decision to go forward with 6 board members. As far as I know, there's not been a lot of response communication concerning that decision that I've noticed. And I think that the communication about it was fairly well received. I did receive a couple of notes that said that they understood the decision and thought it was the right decision. So I think that that went very well. We had our second virtual, well, we really should stop calling it the virtual Meet the Board of Education event yesterday. We had one person who actually connected and had a conversation with board members. I urge our public to utilize these. It is a great opportunity to chat with board members and share your concerns, your thoughts, your questions, and hear from board members in a less formal environment than a board meeting. We will be scheduling these generally so that there's always a daytime session and an evening session in 15-minute increments. So I do urge our members of the public who are watching this to consider signing up, and this information about how to sign up will always be sent out as a K-12 a few days before the event. So there will be another one scheduled immediately in the few days before the next board meeting.
I was going to say, if I could make a request, if we could, if communications, when you guys meet, if you could put together a schedule for us, a tentative schedule, one, so that board members can sign up.
Yeah.
With some lead time, but we can also post that schedule in general on the website so that the community knows about it, right? So that they can see it sort of more than a couple of days ahead of time as well, in case they're,
That is already on the to-do list. It just didn't get done before this one.
Trust me, I understand.
And I think that's all I have on communications, except for the agenda item. One of the agenda items that's coming up for us at the next meeting is that we will be returning to a discussion that we started, well, it seems ages ago, about visual identity for the district, which includes logo, font, and that sort of thing. That obviously, given a lot of the other stuff that was going on, got pushed down in priority, but we don't want to let that work that was already started fall to the wayside. So that'll be coming back on our next agenda.
All right, and then that leaves us with policy. Neil.
Oh, wait, there's
oh.
an Iris.
Oh, sorry, Iris. I keep looking over this way.
Sorry, I just want to ask, make the request. When we sent out the notice for the Meet the DOE, I don't recall, but I don't think it's sent out in Spanish as well. Especially, I want to see if communications and board development can work together, mentioning the fact that we have this vacancy. It would be really good if we pushed out and actually reach out to as many different people and different people who have never actually maybe participated in the board, the school district, to try and encourage them and help them understand what it is the board does, what board service looks like. And these Meet the Board BOE are great opportunities for folks to ask questions prior to us getting to the formal process in March, April, and May. So I would just ask if maybe if communications and board development can liaison on ways to promote board service, because it's really going to be an excellent opportunity.
All right, and now Neil, you are up with policy.
Unfortunately, because of my being basically out of commission for a couple of weeks, we don't have any policy report. But I think perhaps before we leave here tonight, I will ask, or at least I'll send around an email to everybody saying, let's see if we can get something on the calendar by the end of the month, so that perhaps there will be something to present in January.
Okay, thank you. That concludes our board reports, and we will now move on to polling of the board. I will start off in just that we had the PVC Building Planning Council meeting today. It was another fantastic meeting. The focus of today's meeting was on social emotional learning and the needs of our students during this time, and how the PVC is working to, the staff are working to address the needs of our students. So I think it was a very good conversation about, the things that we were doing, the way things have changed, how our social emotional learning has evolved at PVC since 2007 to now, and then how things have shifted in this COVID environment. So I think it was a fantastic session, and we learned a lot about the new format of weekly advisory that they do on the Wednesday, all remote days, that has been working very well for the students and for the staff. So yeah, and we will, the next meeting we'll be discussing community communications and outreach to the community. So anyone else? Josh?
I have two items for polling. Item number one is I attended the Student Faculty Congress, CHHS Student Faculty Congress yesterday, in which Student Faculty Congress elections took place. That is the selection of officers for the Student Faculty Congress. It was a very orderly and thoughtful process, conducted with a lot of respect and seriousness. The candidates, the nomination of candidates was done in a very serious way and very thoughtful way. And the candidates for positions, which included president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, sergeant at arms, and I'm forgetting one. There's a diversity officer, but I don't remember the exact title. Each of them, those who were nominated, when they spoke on their own about their own platform, spoke very thoughtfully and outwardly. That is, about what they intended to do for the students and what they intended to do for the student body. And I was very, very, very impressed by that. And that took up the majority of the meeting. And I was very excited to be there as witness to it. The second item that I have is something that has come up over the last couple of days as I've been watching the news and the discussion of the distribution of vaccines, of COVID vaccine as it becomes available. And I'm very concerned that there's a lot of talk about senior care centers and about hospital workers and such, and there's been no discussion whatsoever about the folks who work in public school buildings, who have contact with children every day. And I think it's something that we ought to be paying attention to, and we certainly should be asking departments of health about it. And I think it's something that we might want to communicate up in advocacy. I don't know if it's an advocacy matter exactly, how we could, what the best way to communicate it is, but I think it's something that we ought to be thinking about because I think it's important. There needs to be a clear plan.
Thank you, Josh. Anyone else for polling? Andrew?
One issue that we've sort of talked about in the past that I was just thinking when Josh was talking about the Student Faculty Congress elections is the possibility of having a student representative on the board. If there's interest in that, that's something that we might want to think about, for the next term. I don't know if there is interest in that. I just wanted to bring it up because it has been mentioned in the past. And we've been talking a lot about really hearing our student voices. I wonder what the feeling is about that.
Josh?
I like the idea. I think obviously, presumably ex officio.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I love the I personally love the idea, but I think we need to figure out exactly how it would work and hear some more details about that.
Yeah, I think there are examples of other boards that have ex officio student members. We can look into those and bring those to the board. Neil?
If I could just add, in my former district, we had 2 high schools, so we had 2 members, 2 student members, and it was a fabulous experience, I think, for the students as well as for the district.
So I would like to just state, as far as that is concerned, that the state education law provides for the election of student members and provides specific guidelines as to who those students may be and what their responsibilities and participation on the board if we do choose that. And that is something that need be done in a formal manner. It's not just a liaison, it's really a student member. If that's something that the board feels we wish to pursue, and I think, as Dr. O'Connell said, it can be an invaluable experience, a wonderful experience for the students and for us. Then I think that is something that would be tasked to policy to then say if that's what we want to do. And I think first, though, we might want to ask Student Faculty Congress, is that something that they believe would be something that they would like to see for the high school student body, because they are high school students? And if so, then we can pursue it. So I think, Josh, I would suggest that even before next meeting of Student Faculty Congress, if you can touch base with the advisors and therefore with the with the officers to see how to proceed to obtain their expression of interest, and then we can follow through.
The one thing I would request from you prior to that, Neil, is if you could send a short summary of what the state law provides so that I could explain it well to them.
Sure.
If you get that to me, then I will include that in, I'll get it onto the agenda for the next faculty conference meeting.
I would agree with Josh that we just want to know what our invitation looks like so that, you know, the students really have a clear idea of what will be expected.
And the commitment, because the commitment would be, among other things, come to every meeting as much as we all can, be at every meeting, participate, not necessarily as a vote, but participate in the discussions, and to participate in other, perhaps other functions of a board member as a student elected board member. So yeah, I will provide that to you, Josh.
Great. Thank you very much. Does anyone else? Yep,
yeah.
Neil, you have some
Yeah,
comments?
I just wanted to very briefly talk about the high school the high school building planning council, which met today. Unfortunately, I was not able to attend, but since they have already sent out, or the high school principal has already sent out to me the materials that were discussed, I can just bring everybody up to date. At the last meeting, and I discussed this last month, the idea was to do a pulse survey of students to look at exactly how they were feeling about the education and the pressures that they may have in a hybrid learning or a remote learning environment. That in a survey was held, what was conducted. Their responses were, and I just want to get this up on my screen. They probably had responses from, looks like 161 students, which would bring you about 25% or maybe 30% of the population of students in the high school. And the Building Planning Council spent their meeting discussing the results of that survey. And what they found was, and they're concerned about, well, is this something that is really a consequence of the method of providing instruction and the connection with the student, or is it just high school and high school pressures? Don't know. They're going to be talking about that more. And the question that is now coming forth is, what are next steps? Do we do a teacher survey? Do we want to deal with other issues? Because we may be going fully remote, and so the questions may be different. Also, after the December break, that is at the next meeting, among the things that will be discussed is restorative approaches to student discipline or corrective actions, and revisions to the student handbook, and whether that will be done with a committee of the whole or splitting the group up into two committees. It's not sure, but that's what will be discussed in January.
Great. Thank you, Neil.
Yep.
And do we have anything else for polling? Andrea?
Just super quick, that CET has this Building Planning Council meeting next week.
All right. Anyone else? Okay. All right. So items needed for the next Board of Education meeting. So our next meeting will be our work session. As we said during board development, we will convene 30 minutes ahead of our normally scheduled time to have a learning session, and it will be on sustainability. I will send those materials out to you as soon as I have them, so everyone has that. And then from there, it will be an executive session work session probationary review. So that is that for the next meeting. And then finally, before we adjourn, we do have an executive session. So for the public who is still joining us, we will expect to adjourn immediately following executive session. So with that, I will recommended action that the Board of Education enters into executive session to discuss ATU Amalgamated Transportation Unit contract negotiations. Neil is moved. And second, Iris seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Oppose, abstain, motion carries. All right. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we will see you into the executive session. We will head into press hall? Yes. All right.